Good afternoon, good morning, wherever you are, and welcome to our Digital Divides event. This is the second event in a series hosted by RUSI's Terrorism and Conflict Research Group. My name is Christopher Hockey. I'm a senior research fellow based in RUSI's Nairobi office. And our terrorism and conflict team is actually spread out across RUSI's main three offices in Nairobi, Brussels, and in London. This is the second in a series focused on online hate, disinformation, and the role of artificial intelligence in shaping these dynamics in different parts of the world. The first event, which was a roundtable held in Berlin in person on the 31st of March, addressed online hate, including misogyny, and addressed the mixing of ideologies, discrimination, and AI in the European context. And at the moment, a conference report is being finalized and will be released soon, hopefully in early June, to reflect on discussions there in Berlin. In today's session, however, we want to focus on the continent of Africa, and the same themes will be explored. And a third event is likely to follow in Brussels, focus on Latin America, but it's hoped that further sessions will then be held looking at other geographies on the same themes. As with a lot of what RUSI does, our project here tries to bring together research, policy, and practice. In this case, practice through the technology sector. And as such, our session today will seek to explore some solutions and recommendations, particularly those that are politically relevant and address the sort of cultural realities of the context we're looking at, as well as those that leverage AI tools in themselves to prevent and mitigate where appropriate. If this is the first session in the series you're joining, I invite you to look at our project page, and I'll put a link in the chat here to that page to see how this fits in within the wider context of the project that we're undertaking. Today, in this Africa-focused event, we'll examine how online content shapes societal norms, behaviours, and policies, how AI plays a role in the proliferation, and the shaping of narratives, and how it creates new content and amplifies existing content. We also want to look at how regional trends specific to our continent can be linked to the international context. So there'll be two sessions. The first, hosted by my colleague, Dr. Joanna de Deus Pereira, who's on the screen there, will look at we'll explore the multifaceted nature of disinformation in particular in Africa, both in a sort of traditional sense, but also the new complexities in the disinformation space introduced by AI. And then the second session, which will be moderated by Claudia Wallner, will address digital violence and examine misogyny and GBV in the African context. And again, how these challenges are amplified by artificial intelligence. Before I hand over, can I ask you all to use the Q&A function as we go, and hopefully we can address everyone's questions. We have a good 2 hours to do so. I hope you find the event useful, and for now I'll hand over to Joanna. Thank you.
Thank you, Toffer, and thank you all the participants to be here. It's a great pleasure to chair this first session, and we will have as speakers one dear colleague and friend as well, Guillaume Sotomayor, and also Dr. Desmond Ngala, who is the founder and CEO of Civic Watch and country project manager for Defy Hate in Cameroon. So I will just give a brief introduction of my esteemed guest speakers. So Dr. Desmond Ngala is also a conflict resolution expert, and through Civic Watch and Defy Hate now, he leads grassroots and national efforts to counter online hate and strengthen community resilience. In this webinar, he will explore how AI is reshaping disinformation in Africa. And I believe we will hear from case studies in Cameroon, Nigeria, Ethiopia, and Kenya, examining and looking at political deepfakes, ethnic rumors, how social media have been used to amplify these messages using AI through platforms like WhatsApp, Facebook, and Bebo. And then lastly, we have Guillaume Sotomayor. He's currently the president of Egregor, a nonprofit dedicated to empower social and environmental innovation consultancy that I invite you all to take a look at. And above all, he's an expert and political and an expert in political and security issues in Africa and in Europe. He's the Africa Senior Analyst at Next Wave, and he's also a research associate at Timbuktu Institute. So I will now give the floor first to Dr. Desmond Ngala to his first intervention. The floor is yours. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Joanna, and good afternoon to everybody. It's a pleasure for me to be here, not only to share perspectives, but also to learn from how AI is changing narratives and actually facilitating or actually retarding your work across concepts of misleading and malinformation, but also issues of hate speech and even GBV across your different countries. I'm very happy also that it was time also we take the African perspective as far as AI is concerned. But particularly with such webinars, I try not to share lots of slides so we can be very engaged. So please use the Q&A like we had in the beginning. Today, it's going to be more of sharing what we've done in Cameroon, but also looking at what has moved from traditional tactics and disinformation to new forms of mis and disinformation powered by AI. And I'm happy also that what I say here could also be challenged from different perspectives, but from also some of the countries I will be using a few examples from. I understand I have about 15 minutes, and in another life, I kind of was like a teacher, and most of the times when teachers talk, they're not told to stop. So I'm going to try to manage my time much more better. The key areas where we see disinformation in I would say in Africa, but most especially in the countries and contexts that have been mentioned by Joanna here, have been partly political. We've had it in ethnic and social. We've had it in governance and economic issues. Disinformation per se, we're not here to define the concepts in which most of us we already know, has actually creeped into this or have actually been moving out of these kinds of this. So there's a symbiotic relationship between these different concepts and issues that have been happening in the traditional world, and also these themes and how AI is now playing with them. We are not only going to be looking at deepfakes and how AI-generated content has been used to facilitate and push a narrative as fast as possible across Africa. But we're going to be looking also about context that have been brought out of content that has been brought out of context, things that have been said here, and with AI we've used them in other scenarios. We've seen them even in Cameroon. We've seen them also in Kenya, where we polarize the use, if not the terminologies and slangs by cultural leaders, political leaders, social actors for this. We're going to also be looking at issues of memes and jokes that people actually are fond of on new forms of media. In Cameroon, for instance, WhatsApp and Facebook remain the most popular forms of open and close. They call open and close, and you know why, kinds of social media. And most of this information come in the forms of jokes. We're celebrating the National Day today. And in under about 4 months, we're going to be running into general elections where President B, a 92-year-old, will actually be running for another mandate. And we've already seen the litmus test at the end of last year, and as of now, we are in a full-blown kind of work being done by mis and disinformation around here. The facets of disinformation that has been formatted within the Cameroonian and Kenyan perspective, I will take it. And I'm very happy that Rosie has also colleagues that are based out there, and they can actually pull questions. And pockets of our operations within the DeFi Hetman network in Eastern Africa, be it in Ethiopia and in South Sudan and parts of Uganda, and also parts of Sudan, actually been run from the Nairobi office. So it makes it very easy for us to have also contextual information from there. There is something I want us to first and foremost understand, that we have disinformation because of the channels it goes through, but we also have disinformation not just because it goes viral. Disinformation goes viral because of the channels they use, but it does not only go viral because of the channels they use, but because of the local nuances. What I mean here by local nuances are how we take information out or into context with local languages and what people actually do say. So what are the ethnic, what are the religious, what are the cultural, what are the political kind of background to information, and why is this information actually being put out there? And what is the role of AI in our today's information? And I would say the first one is it helps us. I would say AI is not a threat like what we see many people say. I would always quote this famous youth leader in Nigeria, Benga Susan, who says that technology is not neutral. It's in the middle, and if you want to get it to do bad things, you would use it for those bad things. And if you want also to get technology to pull you to the other side of the story, it's going to do that. We can go from statistics to different platforms, but to impact. And I want to look at what the impact of AI has been on already existing information. Most of you here are familiar with the different kinds of platforms that we're using, but what has been the impact? One, we've had social polarization. Things that would not have actually been blown out of context. We have now in under 2 minutes text that explains something maybe out of context or miss local context to it. Two, we have incitement to violence that has been happening. In Ethiopia, for instance, in the Oromo area, I don't know if we have people here joining us from that part of Africa. We've seen people who've used language and slangs that actually incite violence on other persons on platforms like Facebook. And because we don't have not only country-based, but contextual understanding of what it's happening, the algorithms in Facebook will not flag this kind of content. And at the end of the day, we see people attacked in real life because content was being shared online. And what is the role of AI here? It does not only bring you facts and facts that are flawed to support what you're trying to push it online, but it also gives you in a very succinct way when it comes to text or when it comes to imagery. And the last one has been AI has also pushed a lot of mistrust into public institutions. In countries where having data, it's difficult. I take the example of Cameroon, where I am actually currently based now. You would see that when you ask AI, can you give me the population of Cameroon? The population is going to give you will be on population that has already been existing online. And you would be asking, okay, maybe it should have been giving me something else. And because you don't believe what AI is giving you based on what you already know, people tend to say either one, public institutions do not have the capacity or the mandate to tell them something, or two, what AI is telling them is false. And I go back again, technology is mostly neutral. And what we do say, whether you pull it to the left or to the right, it's based on you. Traditional misinformation has been political fabrication, local narratives, ethnic manipulations, and so on. But now when we go into AI kind of misinformation, it has gone from just being political to having, I would say, short videos or graphics that are designed very well enough to actually change the narrative for you and me in a very short time. But also, not only these short videos, we've had content that is well written in a very short space of time. Cameroon, for instance, have over 250 ethnic languages, and these languages do not, they all cohabit. But the problem with this is when someone says, I will Gary you, someone from Nigeria would understand that, someone from West Africa would understand that. But someone from Boya in Cameroon will understand that Gary means that you're putting out, you're inciting violence against these people. How well does AI pick these kinds of things? So it has gone from just being naturally political misinformation, ethnic misinformation, to actually putting these things into other contexts that we cannot say. And generally, we always say, what could then be the risk to this? The risk would be that deepfakes, AI-generated content and videos will then flood us and will tend to believe what is not true. Joanna, you tell me when I have, my time is actually coming up, so I speed up. But secondly, we tend to believe false realities, false narratives, which are not what is true. Secondly, we tend to see that algorithms amplify what is at times is more present on the web. Because 4 people are saying, for instance, Paul Biya is dead, and when you hit Paul Biya, it becomes a trend. Is this trend because it's true, or is this trend because algorithms are saying people are actually looking out for Biya? And I would want to not jump into the solutions or kind of locally based solutions we've had for now. But what I want to do is I will take a case study of what we've done in Cameroon within the DeFi Hetna network and share 2 principles there with you. We've had many more people believe content, be it deepfake or even text that has been written by AI, because there is a very low or less level of media and information literacy. Because we don't have access, the socialization mechanisms have been very low, and people have gotten into, I would not say we've been surprised, but we've gotten into a stage where we need to know something, but people are very eager to learn on the go. We tend to grasp just parts of the concepts, we go with them. And that's why someone can believe a video, an audio developed by AI than he would believe something that has been shot in real time. That's the first thing. So yes, within the DeFi Hetna network, we did that. The second thing is, how well do you integrate AI into community radio and communication channels for people who cannot get access to these kinds of tools you and me are using? I'm talking here about Facebook, about WhatsApp. Yes, everyone nowadays can try to use Facebook in its own way. WhatsApp, you can record voice notes in whatever language and you want to record, and the other person at the other side will listen to. But I tell you, that people traditionally still believe in the work that radio does, that television does. How well then do we actually integrate components or concepts that have been brought by AI? Within the DeFi Hetna network, we tried as much as possible to integrate not only community radios, but people who broadcast in local languages and give them these kinds of information. Thirdly, tech tools. What has technology been doing? We have a tool in-house called the Mungo. The Mungo is a figurative river separating English-speaking Cameroon from French-speaking Cameroon. That says particularly how do we move across the different digital platforms and pick what is being said in A, B, or C, and bring it together, aggregate it, and then analyze and tell people, look, these are the trends we're catching. Are we going to wait for Northern Hemisphere's kinds of tech development technologies to come and tell us, oh, we're picking signals or heat maps of hate speech and misinformation in your communities? This has been part of what we've been doing. And I understand I have less than 3 minutes. My recommendations could be, it could be triple-fold. I would say, one, I would start with, this is a fully, I know RUSI is also research kind of organization. So There need to be more, we need to invest more research into African-centric ethics for AI. Do we really take Africa's perspective when we build this? We say, oh, these solutions are inclusive. We make them inclusive after they've been built. So I think that we should advocate for an inclusive design, a design that takes into consideration all the differences across the communities and countries around Africa. Secondly, civil society should not only just go between doing things, but I think we've always been promoting fact-checking and advocating for it. But governments need to also be told not to be afraid of technology, but to embrace technology, because technology generally is always been much more feared, most especially in countries like mine. And for tech platforms, I don't think I have to say anything here, because it's between, this is a slippery slope. You tell them, hey, look, we want you to enhance moderation and look at local context and languages. And then they do kind of quoting and say, look, we're doing it. And this is what's happening. My closing thoughts are very simple. Ethics should actually guide AI in mitigating mis and disinformation across Africa. We should not sit and feel like it's a question for one or two persons, but it should be a question of all of us from design, from scratch, so that we can together go ahead. Thank you, Joanna, and I'm going to stay on here till the end to take questions. If we don't take them now, even at the end.
Thank you. Thank you, Desmond. Well, really fascinating point of view, especially knowing a little bit also from what is going on in West Africa, and precisely what you mentioned regarding the specification of how important it is to be context specific and to look at the different lens of the different Africas, even when talking about AI and disinformation. We have some questions, but I think we will leave them until the end of the session. I will now give the word to Guillaume. And thank you, Desmond, because you said my name perfectly well. So the floor is yours, Guillaume.
Thank you very much, Joanna. It was a pleasure, and listening to my dear colleague, it was really a fascinating presentation, and I hope that I will be able to complete it with some thought for myself. So today I wanted to present on online hate speech and disinformation in Africa, and just ask ourselves a question: is the issue digital? Because the hate and violence, have not disappeared; they have evolved. The traditional repertoires of conflict and conflictuality, I like the historian called Charles Tilly termed them. They were shaped by the industrial ages, and they have been transformed. Today, hate speech assumes new modalities and layered meanings. It stretches upward into the symbolic and the geopolitical. It is infused with historical, religious, and political narratives, and downward into the subterranean realms of organized crime and ethno-communal segmentation. These dimensions are not separate; they are intersected, and they reinforce one another. Once predominantly, I would say, national, or even sometimes very local in the scope, the action of dissemination of hate speech is now profoundly global and interconnected between different levels. While local actors, to my view, remain the key, their messages, of course, are increasingly part of supranational dynamics, right, which are enabled by the ubiquity of digital platforms. And there, I have a slight disagreement with what my colleague just said about the fact that, for me, I would say, that the platform themselves are a political and geopolitical and in the creation of the algorithms. And so it is no longer merely a message, it is a strategy. And so the advent of the communication age, coupled with the emergence of deepfakes and artificial intelligence, has profoundly reshaped how hate and violence are generated, spread, and adapted. And so it has accelerated polarization, amplified speed and reach, and hardened belief systems. So belief systems is what is, again, very important here. We are going to come back to it, but does the digital transformation truly alter the underlying logic of the actors, political, economic, religious, and media-based, who produce and circulate hate? Or is it merely a continuation of old conflicts or on a new battlefield? So this is for me the key question. And so this continuity demands examination, and across Africa, entrenched forms of political contestation persist. Of course, actors deploy divisive and inflammatory rhetoric as tools in the pursuit of influence, and that has been the case for a very long time. Revolutionary and insurrectionary discourses, often radical, resonate across Pan-Africanist movements, for instance, as well as among their adversaries. And so in this context, online hate and disinformation are rarely ends in themselves. And rather, I think that they serve as tactical instruments. Real people with real interests manipulate events and narratives to pursue political or economic advantages. So many participants, it's a tool within a longer and larger project, and we need to understand it this way. So many participants in these digital hate campaigns may be caught up in them unconsciously, dragged along by currents that they did not create. So one of the key questions then that we must ask ourselves, I do believe, is, are we mistaking who the we are? So the true democratic failure in the information age lies, to my view, in our inability to pierce the illusionary bubble constructed by those who exploit information for anti-democratic ends. So the fact, for instance, for me, is that we continue speaking about social networks as if they were existent by themselves and not created by humans with specific design, or that when you create as a politician a YouTube channel, you do it also with a specific purpose. And Telegram channel, exactly the same thing. So a striking example here for me is the dominant narrative promoted notably in French media, but and others, and political spheres, which attributes, for instance, Africa's disinformation or hate speech problems to foreign influences. Chiefly Russia, of course, more recently China, the Gulf states, and even sometimes the United States. And so this perspective, which is rooted in neo-colonial assumptions, implies that, and I'm going to be very blunt here, I'm sorry, you know me, Joanna, but implies that Africans overall, in their variety in people, are incapable of generating their own disinformation. And this narrative is doubly problematic because once it allows external observers to ignore their own contradictions and mistakes, and it absolves the primary local actors, political, religious, and economic and media elites, of accountability. And so this is why the discourse on AI and online platforms must always be connected to being human, because otherwise we lose, again, the real talk on who is responsible and who are allies and who are problematic, always the dimensions of society that we need to address. So we are living through a paradox. So the most powerful weapon of disinformation is not artificial intelligence, but the discrediting behavior and inconsistencies of elites. And the temporary victors in the battle of narrative control are often those elites themselves. I like this old sentence from Napoleon, who said, who won, "If I let the press run free, I wouldn't last for 3 months in power." And today, regimes, democratic or not, threatened by growing public discontent, often seek to stifle free expression, hoping that silencing information or manipulating it would prevent collective outrage from igniting. And so this censorship takes many forms: harassment, legal repression, even violence against journalists, citizens, and dissidents. And across the world, people have died for sharing information or simply for asserting the right to do so. And we need to keep that in mind. And so what I think is in this momentum, right, it is a question of also where does the success of this information come from? I don't think that it comes from a vacuum. Populist movements thrive and hate speech thrive, not because people have abandoned reason, but because they seek a new rationality, one that reflects their lived experiences, their hardships, or their desire for hope. The success of disinformation, again, do not lie in mass gullibility, but in the search for coherence in a fractured world. And so disinformation resonates when it offers a plausible story, one that explains suffering and offers a sense of agency, even if illusory. And populist leaders tap into this emotional undercurrent. They elevate the forgotten, they amplify marginalized voices, and they promise to break through elite control. Whether sincere or strategic, they provide meaning of those excluded from the dominant conversation. To understand their appeal, we must move beyond dismissiveness. We must recognize, the humanity and internationality behind the digital veil. So to conclude, we must understand the problem of online hate speech and the new rise of instruments like deepfakes. And so as being coming from different actors, from different structures, from human-based technology, and they must be addressed together. So this is not a battle of ideas alone. The challenge lies in correctly defining first the nature of the problem, which we are doing, I think, now. And we are confronting what is, in essence, an international phenomenon. So while still using the tools of local policing. And so to respond effectively, we must consider for me 3 aspects, and I will conclude here. Expose intent. While not a cure-all, transparency matters. People deeply resent being manipulated. Revealing motives can reduce the power of hate speech and false narratives. Number 2, demand platform accountability. This is what my colleagues have just said. And I think that the current bias and moderation policies strengthen the inequalities they claim to combat. Decenter AI as the core problem. So artificial intelligence is neither the root cause nor the ultimate solution. It is a tool, as we discussed. Its impact determined by the intentions of those who wield it. So as we discussed, in many African countries, anti-elite movements have taken aim at political, economic, religious, and traditional power structures. And so these movements reflect deep, deep disillusionment, vast inequalities, inaccessible public services, unfulfilled promises, structural adjustments, etc., pervasive injustices. So you have a really large bunch of citizens that believe that their political class or media class is corrupted. And so this is the reason behind the rising belief in conspiracy theories, the disengagement from democratic and social processes, historical rates of electoral abstention. And so the media overall are not entirely rejected. Truth is good that has been shuttered and is replaced by cynicism. And so research show again that people don't fall for disinformation because they are irrational, but because they are searching for a new, more authentic rationality. And so a new lens to understand this and to imagine the future beyond elite control. So we must again listen, not to validate harmful ideas, but to grasp the hunger for meaning, dignity, and voice. And in this digital age, we must never forget behind every viral post, every trending lie, there remains a profoundly human will, often misdirected, but always real. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Guillaume. It's always a pleasure to listen to you. Also, perfect timing. We have several questions on the chat box, but I would like to also underline this is a conversation we had so many times on the question on the dimension of the importance of the emotional, and how this is way beyond the capability or incapability of different countries, in this case, or different African citizens to have their own agency, and sometimes we disregard and completely forget, from our very westernized point of view, that the role of discontent, the hunger that you mentioned for a meaning and for a voice, can be also weaponized in AI and this disinformation channels as well. So I will now open the questions. There are 3 questions on the Q&A. I believe you can all read the questions on your chat. So the first one, I think it's a comment. There is the last question. It's one of, I think, very relevant and important questions. Do you believe that AI, social media algorithms that present individuals with more content related to their past viewing patterns are increasing the extremity of people's political views to the extent that this spills over into real world conflict in the African context? I think this question can be answered differently from both of you. So I will now give the floor to Ngala to start, or to pick one of the questions or all of them to answer.
Thank you so much, Joanna. And I think that I would start with the second one, then I would give my thoughts on the first one. That's just a comment there.
Yeah.
I agree with you that AI-driven algorithms have pushed lots of contents on the plates of people around Africa. When the tendency of you researching on any social media platform, any politically inclined content, and seeing this content continuously on your feed, on your timeline, makes you to either start believing more or start consuming this more. And we know the cycle of consumption. The more you read this, the more you come across this, the more you believe that what you're seeing is true. But also, what it does is that it confirms at times the biases that people do have. We do know everywhere in the world the people who are either left to right, who are centric, or people who have divergent views as to political opinions that govern and rule them. And the moment in which you start researching on the other side of it, what could potentially happen is that most of that kind of information can flood you, and you would get into what most of the times we call infobesity. That is, you get to consume more information than what you would have actually wanted, and you have to actually spill it out. And by spilling it out, this could actually be online, but also offline. We've seen cases, I can give you a very direct example. We've seen cases where someone researched particular information, and out of a sudden he starts getting this information so much that he says, look, I don't want to get this kind of information. What do I do? People run to us and say, what do I do? And now I think it's good also that some of the social media platforms are taking this into account, and they are saying they give you the option to either uncheck or check out, say I'm not interested in this kind of content anymore. So that's my thought on this. As to the first question on the Pegasus spyware, I think that it's not only the Pegasus. I must say, we have many more of this, and we've even seen spyware deployed by Huawei with proofs that we've seen them, and this has been presented. I'm not the only one seeing it. You're going to see them across Uganda and other countries, where journalists and data rights activists have been targeted on the front line. And how many states do we deploy this to? I can't tell you for a fact, but I know for sure that it's been deployed in many states. The problem with this is that there are lots of people who are victims to this who do not have an idea that their phones have been tapped, their devices actually been listened into, content they're sharing is actually been picked on daily basis. And to the number of countries, I can't give you. Joanna?
Yes, thank you. Guillaume, do you want to add? Now we have also a fourth question, but you can go ahead and answer the three first ones if you want.
Yeah, I'll do my best. Thank you, Joanna, and thank you, dear colleague, for your answer. I'm going to try to add some additional elements on it. So with Pegasus, yes, I have similar answer. I think that the number of states is extremely important, and you have now actually what you need also to understand is that you have really specialized actors, right, in this domain, who are built and exist in order to create this kind of spyware and sell it to political actors across the world, not only in Africa. And I've been doing it for some time now, and they're very good at it. And so we need to understand here that you also have some specialized, PR even, that appear as PR companies from, I will give you like a number of countries where they are quite numerous. So you have a couple in the UK, you have a couple in Israel, you have some in France, you have some in different parts of the world that do have this kind of specialized equivalent to Pegasus spyware and services. And this is having terrible effects. Because again, what we need to remind, and this is what I'm trying to do within my entire presentation, I think now it's quite clear, is to remind, and which my colleague Ngala just did, is it actually ends in affecting people's life directly. So it threatens a lot of people. I don't know exactly the question on the FCDO imperatives. I'm sorry, I cannot answer that question. I don't have any like element to respond, Mr. Christopher Ria. I'm sorry. So on the AI-driven social media algorithm. So again, I thank you very much for that question. I'll be a little bit again careful on the way the question is framed. So yes, AI-driven social media algorithm for sure increase what we call again is chambers of echo chambers. So it is what we call the regime of truth that people basically will create while actually being constantly confronted, not only to the same information, but also creating this kind of virtual community where they will only be reassured. So it is what we like. It's on psychological levels. It's been studied, and the people that do create this kind of algorithm also know that very much so. That people, tend to be more active and so feel more rewarded psychologically once they are actually surrounded by people who think the same thing than them and who tell them that they are right thinking what they think. And the problem about this AI-driven social media algorithm, and we can speak about also another example, which is YouTube, whom famously, created an algorithm that from the get-go was designed in order to push people towards more radical content. And so knowing that this radicality will actually increase consumption, so increase the people staying longer on the website or on the platform, which means additional advertising, which means additional revenues. So, and this is where I'm leaning toward. It's just two different dimensions that I would like to add here. Once that this social media algorithm were created again by human companies in order to build a business model and a profitable business out of exploiting people's tendency for radicality and polarized views. That's one. And so they're making a business out of polarization. And so the second part that I would like to mention here is that it works so well because actually the regime of truth are being shattered at the moment, because the main concepts around which we have built our modern societies in terms of inclusive development, human rights, democracy, even like trade or neoliberalism, all of those ideologies are being right now considerably criticized, and a large chunk of our populations around the world don't believe in the promises that that should accompany those concepts and those words. And they don't believe also the people that are supposed to incarnate those promises, being political, but also sometimes religious leaders, media, and that goes way beyond the African continent. It applies in many places around the world. And it is around that this AI-driven social media algorithm have so much effect. And so we need to understand that it is because it is not social media algorithm that AI algorithm that created that situation. They aggravated it for sure. They accelerated it, but they did not create it. And finally, so the last question, and was my so
I think it's related to the main challenges that African countries face in relation to regulation of AI-driven content and holding platforms accountable.
So perhaps, Dr. Ngala, you would like to answer to this question before I do?
Yeah. I think from a policy perspective, I would always say most social media companies are built on a capitalist prism. So there is we have companies that they're conceived in a social kind of structure, but in the deployment is deployed with a capitalist perspective. And when you deploy a brand or product like this, your focus tend to change. And then a number of reasons why there are obstacles. I would say, just to the top of my mind, about 5 I can give you. And the first one is that how much money does a country like Cameroon, Central African Republic, Gabon, Angola, the Congo, I don't want to call Nigeria, because yes, I saw Nigeria force Twitter, now X, out of Nigeria, and they, not as if they're not there, but their office actually had to move at some point. And I'm happy that we have people joining us here from Nigeria. I've seen a couple of names I know with this. How much do we bring on the platform? I'm not talking about content we generate, but about money we pay into ads and stuff like that. And because that the money you pay is far less than what they would lose if they give no listening ear to any kind of regulation. The second thing is countries.
Yeah, this is the key. This is what is going to be my point. For me, this is the most important point, Dr. Ngala. I fully concur with that.
Thank you so much, Guillaume. The second of it is look at the population size. Well, I'm not talking about the country-specific population. I'm talking about the population ratio as to what is online on the platforms and to what exists even within the different countries. Meta has how many million users today around the world? And when you look at the number of users per country, and you come to your country, there are 500,000, there are 5 million people using your country. Meta has about 1/10 of the world's population on its different platforms. And you're telling him, no, look, you must actually adhere to rules and regulations within my country. They say, oh, who tells you, or you want to even have people from your country using this? And I know that since they've already gotten addicted to our platforms, they're going to use VPNs. I'm here. Some of the attendees could also know that I do work I do actually tell Meta in their face what is not right and what is right. And that's why I'm a trusted partner account of Meta. And I've told them this to their face. The problem with you is that you can't really act because you feel like you're up there and people are down here. And there are times in which, when we're telling you country-specific dynamics, you are telling us Californian-based backyard kind of design conceptions. And we're telling you it does not work here that way. The people who believe everything that is on your platform is true. So you have to do it this way. And they're saying, no, we don't want to do it this way because of that. The next thing is governments don't even know. I approached the National Communications Council of Cameroon and la Haute Communauté de la Communication du Gabon, which is next door. And it was doing a comparative study for an article I wanted to write, but also it was very interesting because it falls in line with my work. And I was telling them about regulations that exist in the EU, in Asia, and even in North America as to content that cannot actually be broadcasted, as to the way platforms do behave, as to how platforms are even being dragged into some of these things. And the so-called experts from these two countries, I am Cameroonian, and today is the National Day of Cameroon, so do not get me wrong, I'm not trying to paint that country black. I'm just sharing my views as to my experience on the ground. They asked me, so how do we get to know about these things? I said, it is your role as the regulator to know these things. And if you don't know, there is nothing I can do. The only thing I can do is I can invite these people here for you. And I'm happy that Meta is now in contact with some commissions in Cameroon. Thanks to we actually created the links and said, look, they're doing this elsewhere, but in our own countries, they're not doing it in these countries. The other thing is lobbies. This question is a very, very pertinent question. And I can give you another very concrete example that when these platforms do land in these particular countries, there are even lobbies within governments that lobby for them not to talk to the right people they're supposed to talk to. And these lobbies are so strong. I've seen them in some countries where people tell you, look, don't talk to this person. You have to go talk to that person. And they make it look like these platforms don't have representatives at all. It took about 3 years, no, about 2 years or so for the government of Cameroon to know that we had the email address and the phone number of one of the policy advisors of TikTok. And that through just a simple phone call, they could call this person and say, look, we are representative of a sovereign government and we're calling on the basis of this. And the last one will be technology. I will end with that. If you don't want them to come in, what do you do? Do you have the manpower? Do you have the technical know-how to boot them out?
Thank you, Ngala. Indeed, very thought-provoking. Also reminded me that probably this point of the, especially from Europe and United States, there was this habit to go to Africa doing capacity building, but always discontextualized of the very different Africas that exist, even within the regions, West Africa, East Africa, even the countries within are completely different. But also this raises many questions in terms of what can be done in capacity building for the governments at this respect, directly connecting them to the platforms. Guillaume.
I couldn't add anything to what was already being said on question 4 by my colleague. I just wanted to respond to the 5th question that we received. Yes. On the connection between AI generated material and terrorist action across the continent. And yes, there's been cases that we have seen. I can actually tell you for a few across Africa. Actually, you have some in North Africa recently that have been very worrying, because there's several instances of AI generated materials and AI generated photography, videos. But now what we've seen, to give you a very recent, quite understudied example, is that an AI bot, so chatbot, that some terrorist organizations have been using in terms to facilitate recruitments on several platforms. So that is particularly worrisome. And yes, so you have GIS organizations that are developing this kind of capacities, right?
Ngala.
Definitely, I think Guillaume has raised one of the concerns, the pockets of it, and in about 2 months back, we saw something which was kind of very new to us within the fight against Boko Haram. And Cameroon is kind of in the intersection between Chad, Nigeria, and Niger, and we saw kind of drone-led RPG attacks on military positions. And to content forwarded, following this, we started seeing content being published on online platforms and very well written in French, not Arabic, and so on. So it gives us the impression like someone is powering these kinds of questions and into AI machines, and they're pumping them back with answers, and they're pushing them out so as to actually recruit also from the outside world. I would call it that way. Yeah.
I think we have 5 more minutes. Any questions from the audience? I have one last question. I saw that especially over the last elections in several different countries, there was also a kind of instrumentalization of influencers, new Pan-Africanist influencers, and with a combination with AI. What are the trends regarding this hybridization? But picking on what Guillaume mentioned from the very beginning, that AI, behind AI, there's always a profoundly human dimension. What have you been observing regarding this combination between the powerful tool that new young Pan-Africanist influencers have been having in Africa and the use of AI? What have you been observing in this dimension?
So the use, sorry, Dr. Ngala, do you mind if I jump in? Thank you. No, but what I can tell in very short is that this is a really, really worrying trend, and thank you for mentioning it, John. I think it's particularly worrisome because, again, we have seen a professionalization of both influencers, kind of specialize in hate speech, sometimes used by external, powers through different channels. Even you have had some time, so journalists, human rights activists, you have had young or older TV presenters, etc. You have a number of influencers growing and who've been connected to, again, to the use of AI. But again, the point that I really want to stress out here is the fact that it has been more and more sophisticated, more and more professionalized on every single part of the trend, so from production to diffusion to then I would say elevation or acceleration of the phenomenon.
Johan, just maybe to continue to add to this, we've seen also a very strong role being played by the diaspora in propagating AI-generated content. Most of the times they know that policy and lobby groups out there, investors, are looking for content online, and these governments down here print documents on papers and paste them on billboards, keep in the drawers, and wait for fairs to go show investors around the world that, oh, look, this is what is happening. And we have disgruntled, a pocket of disgruntled Africans who are out there. They're not happy with their governments, and they know that the first thing they're going to do is to hit on websites to check on this, to see what's happening. And Joanna, just maybe to link it up, I saw a question about AI in conflict settings. I will also say that in most of the times, even in countries that are very poor, even in communities that are very extremely not very educated as far as media is concerned, they always have a relay, which we have people out there in different towns and cities across the West who then become the mouthpiece for these particular communities. So you sit there and someone is telling your story and using AI because he have like sketchy facts and he just needs a full-blown article to go on newspapers. I think it took us time to understand that some of these things were even being written by AI, and up till date, we still have news articles that are actually generated by AI and we don't know. So in conflict settings, yes, it shapes the narratives. It actually tells your story for you, at times in a very biased way, whereas you're not actually there. Thank you.
Thank you, Ngala. I think we just have one last question from Petra. We have talked a lot about challenges and problems, and what about the solutions? Any African developed solutions for AI-generated problems on this domain?
Yes.
Guillaume, let me go first.
Go, please go, please. Yeah.
All right. Sorry, I just want to give you an example. So there is a Kenyan app called Bobby. It's not well known to a lot of the public, but lots of people are actually trying to use it and see how well. How well do we actually use these kinds of applications that do also have local context? But as to if Africa has also developed or is designing AI tools or AI responsive tools to its particularities in Africa, I would say I've been in a couple of, I was not in Windhoek for I think the second Africa or first or second Africa session by CIPESA on AI in Africa. But I know there are pockets of actions being led so that we have an African groomed AI, not only tool, but perspective as to how this content and these platforms that are coming in can actually integrate within the African media landscape.
I think with this we reach our end. I believe that we would stay here all afternoon. As far as I know, some of the speakers and the quality and the extent of knowledge they have. But I now invite you to for the second session. I will hand over to my colleague Christopher Hockey. It was an immense pleasure to listen to you and hope to meet you anytime soon, Ngala, and for you, Guillaume, it will be sooner than for Ngala for sure. Thank you so much. Please.
Thank you, Joanna. Guillaume and Ngala, I'm going to abuse my position as the chair to just ask one last question. I think we do have a little bit of time still. You mentioned the use of sort of bots in recruitment strategies, or for the purposes of recruitment. I just wonder how that then translates into on the ground movement towards say an extremist group or a criminal entity. So obviously, if there are bots being involved in the recruitment at some point, presumably someone needs to step in physically to help that individual move to where they're trying to go. So I just wondered, yeah, and where those examples have been found.
So in Southeast Asia, in Europe, it's been also used for recruitment at some point of the Islamic State, even in the US. So we've seen that actually in different settings. It's not entirely new, and it's been developed as well on several gaming platforms and different areas that actually also are quite popular across the African continent. And then I'm going to abuse my position as being one of the panelists and try to respond very quickly to one of the questions that I just saw from the chat that I loved, because Kenya is a really interesting example. And yes, there is, and I think, thank you for raising that point. It was an anonymous spectator, but thank you, anonymous spectator, for raising the disproportionate exposure of marginalized communities. And so in all aspects of the issue, sexual minorities, women, rural youth, but not like only, so you would have some community-based discrimination around online hate speech and information in terms of targeting, but also so the necessity to have new resilience mechanisms that will perhaps use AI, but again, that perhaps will also be human-led. And so this comes from perhaps from the emergence of new leadership, to the quality of education, to on the cyber education. It goes to fact-checking organization, protection of legal protection of journalists and cyber activists. It's a whole different tool set that we need, and of course some geopolitical pressures on to really try to make the action of some of the large platforms evolve. So I would say that it's a very thorough response that is needed for a very thorough issue. Thank you.
I would say, Chris, that so there's something we've been seeing across Francophone Africa with some colleagues that we run some networks around these places. It's called generally les cabinets noirs. If I want to translate it loosely, it will be there will be a representation of what we call bots in real life. So these are persons recruited to sit and work as community managers in offices from I don't know, 9 to 5 jobs, and share narratives. And these are narratives that bots start sharing online first, but they need to humanize them. They need to actually get this content to people. And because someone is sharing them with a human touch, because someone is actually giving them on the ground or in a neighborhood kind of experience of what a bot is sharing, it becomes much more real for people across to see. Maybe we're seeing that lots and lots because we're now moving into elections. Cameroon is, we're going to have elections in October this year. And we started to see this kind of mix between technology or tech deployed bot and human intelligence, or what I would call community manager on the other side, just merging. I can't definitely share more than this here, but there are insights to this in which I could also share later.
Thank you very much, both of you. And I hope that that last question that you addressed, Guillaume, around minority groups, hopefully will come up as well in our second session. So we'll now move to the second and final session of today's webinar. So thank you very much to both Guillaume and Desmond and Ngala. I'll hand over to Claudia Wallner, my colleague, who will be looking at digital violence and examining misogyny and GBV in the African context. and how these challenges again are may or may not be amplified by AI. So over to you, Claudia, and thank you so much.
Thank you so much for the introduction here, and thank you also to all of our panelists from the first session. I appreciate that you probably have other things to move on to in your day, but I think if you are able to stick around and maybe also chip in for some of the questions later in this session, I think that would be a really interesting crossover as well. But shifting slightly in terms of the thematic focus now. So we'll look in the session at the rise of digital violence, specifically misogyny, technology-facilitated gender-based violence, and how emerging technologies, including AI, are really shaping this threat landscape in the African context. I think as we begin, it's worth just noting that, as was already, I think, discussed in a lot of detail in the last session, there's no single African experience of online gender-based violence. Of course, each national and local context brings its own distinct social, cultural, political dynamics that really influence how these harms manifest and how they're addressed. So in this session, we have a Nigerian perspective on this. We were going to have a Kenyan perspective as well, but unfortunately, one of our speakers had to drop out last minute for health reasons. But we'll have this one perspective here, but really just to note that, of course, this is something that is not uniform across the continent. I think also important to say that, of course, offline realities really remain incredibly important in this context. But our discussion today is really focused on how online spaces, social media platforms, messaging apps, live streams, and AI tools are really being used to facilitate and to normalize, and in some cases even automate forms of gender-based abuse, discrimination, violence. And we'll also reflect on what can be done about this. What are the risks that we need to be urgently aware of? But also, how can we use AI and other digital tools, not just to cause harm, but also to prevent it, to design safer online environments? And then finally, another thing to note here is that while I think this session focuses largely on the experiences of women and girls, who are, of course, disproportionately affected by gender-based violence, this is also something that affects people of all genders and all identities. So it's not just an issue of women and girls. But with that, I think we're incredibly fortunate to have with us very, very esteemed speaker, Chioma Agwebo, who is a seasoned advocate working at the intersection of women's rights, media, politics, and technology. So wearing many, many hats here. With her master's degree in social media, first degree in mass communication, and then also her current doctoral studies in development communication. She brings both an academic perspective and also practical knowledge of her work. And her work being as executive director of TechHer, where she leads initiatives that use technology to tackle gender-based violence, including managing a platform that documents online gender-based violence and that supports survivors to access justice. And then she also co-runs a gender-based violence emergency response fund, which provides rapid funding to survivors of sexual and gender-based violence in rapid time windows. So I think Chioma really brings a lot of practical and strategic insight into rights-based advocacy with over a decade of experience, incredible experience in leading and supporting civic and feminist movements, from Enough is Enough to Bring Back Our Girls, to the State of Emergency Gender-Based Violence Movement, which she convened in 2020. So I think her work really reflects a very deep commitment to amplifying citizen voices and to advancing justice through both digital tools, which we'll talk about today, and also offline tools. So with that, a very long introduction to your very impressive CV, Chioma, thank you so much for being here. Excited to hear your reflections. And again, because we had the other speaker drop out, I will not be bothering you with time limits here. I'm just excited to hear from you. So I'll hand it over to you.
Great. Thank you very much. And good morning, good afternoon to everyone. Thank you for joining. I think this is a really interesting discussion, and I must commend the speakers from the first panel. Just wanted to jump off from something Guillaume had said, and agree with him when he said technology-facilitated gender-based violence is not a new thing. What we are seeing in Africa, across the world, in Nigeria, is we are seeing a bleeding of already existing violence that happens offline. So just wanted to start with that premise. Tech-facilitated gender-based violence is not a new thing. One of my favorite things to say is that, technology is like a knife. You can peel an orange, or you can stab someone. And unfortunately, what we're seeing right now is there are more people creating products, etc., to cause harm, almost more than there are people who are, creating tech for good. As a matter of fact, I was in a conversation yesterday, and one of the ladies said that if you look at the top, some of the top apps, within Play stores, etc., there are more apps that can be used to perpetrate violence, top 10, top 20, top 100, than there are apps that can be used to do good. So this is the state within which we currently operate. But I wanted to talk from the Nigerian perspective, from the work we've done at TECA around technology-facilitated gender-based violence. And the first thing to say is, back in 2020, 2021, our work was actually born from a place of digital literacy. We started out saying that we wanted to teach women and girls how to use technology. We would go into secondary schools, etc. And trigger warning, one of the things we then found out was, after we'd spoken to them about digital citizenship, safety online, one of the secondary school girls, so approximately 13 or 14 years old, came to one of us and said, this is what her teacher sent to her. And her teacher had sent her pictures and videos of his privates and asked her if she had seen this in person before. And he was willing to show her in person some of the things they were learning in biology. And it broke our hearts, because I started to think, we are welcoming, our entire ethos at TECA is to expose women and girls to technology, especially vulnerable girls, especially people for whom technology is out of reach. And are we doing this to the detriment of the girls, because we are then exposing them to a new layer of violence that they didn't even know was possible, because we'd spoken to them about the right age to open a Facebook account, a Twitter account, etc. And so as we struggled to get justice, or to get some sort of accountability from that teacher with the school, we started thinking, how do we create protections for women and girls? We're not just going to open them up to this big new world of technology and digital and social and leave them vulnerable to attacks. And this is where our work began. We started researching online gender-based violence in Nigeria. And one of the things that we found is, if you think the stats for physical violence and emotional violence are bad, wait till you see what technology-facilitated gender-based violence looks like. And so we did this research. We found out quite a number of things. One of the biggest things we found out kind of ties into Lena's question. And I see that Lena had asked a question from the first session, which was, why is Africa not in their view? And why is Africa not leading the charge for regulation, etc.? It was just the fact that, first, a few things. First of all is, governments, or the government that we engaged, didn't recognize gender-based violence as a problem. And if you look at a number of countries in Africa, and if you look at the way their problems are categorized, gender-based violence is seen as a social issue. It is seen as a charitable issue. It is seen as something that NGOs and civil society do. It is not seen, for instance, as a security issue. So when men are killed, when there are wars, etc., then you say, oh yes, there's violence in this place. There's an insurgency, there's an attack, etc. But when women are killed, we call it femicide, and we call it, intimate partner violence. And that, in a lot of ways, takes away from the severity of the fact that a crime has been committed, a human being has been killed. And so every time we spoke to a government official and we said, oh, there's violence in this area, there's violence in that area, they would say, oh, you NGO people should handle it. And let's call them together and let's have a remediation session, or let's sort it out. And so we decided that further down the line, we wanted to start looking at ways to support survivors of gender-based violence to access justice in Nigeria. What's now interesting is we started something called Safe Space Africa, which is a webinar series that brings African practitioners, trust and safety, etc. together. And unfortunately, the problems are the same. Why aren't tech companies taking Africa seriously? There's the inequality. There's the fact that, you know, technology, the production, Africa is seen a lot like the consumer of the technology that the West is producing. And so it's kind of like you should be grateful you're getting these technologies. I remember being in a conversation with a group of people 2 years ago, and they wanted me, they wanted to put together this collective on AI. And I had been brought in to co-chair. And one of the things one of the ladies said to me was she wanted me to be in charge of the African conversation. And I said, why? You're not having a European conversation. You're not having an American conversation. Why do you want to gather Africa into a group? And she said something like, well, you will better understand the challenges of what's, and I'm like, but you don't have anyone better understanding the challenges of the Americas, of Europe, of Asia. Why do you have a global collective and then this little pocket in the middle? And she said yes, so that, you know, when their technologies, they can be passed on. And I'm like, you are going to perpetrate the very inequality you have set up this collective to address. But I digress. So we have inequalities. We also have a spend issue. Nigeria has recently fined Meta, and in a conversation my colleagues were in a few days ago, one of the things we found is that the fine, which might seem significant for Nigerians because it's about 290 billion naira, is actually 0.01% of Meta's spend. And so the sums, when you match this against the sums that Meta has been fined by the EU, the sums that Meta has been fined by the Americas, there is a tendency to overlook the issues that are coming from Nigeria, for instance, because this is just a drop in the ocean of the gazillions of dollars that we've got. The final challenge, still responding to Lina's question, is that there's a lack of cohesion. The EU, for instance, has come up with an online safety act. The UK has come up with an online safety act. A lot of continents are organizing. Australia, etc., are coming together to put together legislation that governs the way technology operators can operate in their areas. We don't have that in Nigeria. We don't have that across the continent. We don't have a continent-wide piece of legislation that clearly defines for technology companies what harms are. There are conversations ongoing currently, and TECA is a part of some of them, but up till this moment, that doesn't exist, which means that people are engaging governments individually, people are engaging these tech companies individually on a case-by-case basis, therefore reducing the amount of negotiating power that the continent can have in ensuring that technology is safe for its people. So, but coming back to my story, we started, this work around online gender-based violence. We started training young girls, young women. We were going to universities. We were producing games, because one of the things that we found out is that games are a really strong way to pass messages across. So we turned local games into digital safety tool games because people will recognize them. They're games that we've all played in Nigeria, no matter what part of the country you grew up in. And so we turned digital safety information into that. We also turned things like charades into digital safety games, again, to bring people into that, digital safety awareness. And then we found that there wasn't enough conversations around persons with disabilities and queer persons as far as their experience with online gender-based violence. And so we went back into the field, racked through our communities, found a number of organizations working in those spaces to lead this charge. And then we started research into those. The report from that should be published within the next month or so. Coming from all of that, we decided that there was an urgent need for us to support survivors of gender-based violence online. And so we built out Quram, which is one of the local languages in Nigeria, and it means keep me safe. And what Quram does is it allows us to receive cases of online gender-based violence from women and girls in Nigeria, regardless of what state of the country they're in. And then we work with them to navigate Nigeria's sometimes tough justice system to access justice. Now, the thing is, justice looks like a number of things. For some people, it is we are able to get a device back. We are able to get the perpetrators to sign an undertaking to not publish nudes. In some cases, and I think one of the previous speakers mentioned being trusted partners with Meta. We're trusted partners with Meta as well, with partners like We're also partnered with platforms like ILO, Stop NCII, etc. And so we're able to effect takedowns in some instances, which is great. Other times we are able to get people arrested and, like I mentioned, retrieve devices, but also ensure that the content is not further perpetuated, which is a challenge that we've seen in a number of instances, because you take criminal content down on Facebook, and then it shows up on WhatsApp, and then it shows up on Instagram, and then it shows up on TikTok. And by the time it gets to TikTok, you have people repurposing that content. So technically, it's not the original content, but there's semblances of that content that people have now repurposed in the name of content creation. So that's kind of where we are. One of the things we then started to think about was, how do we advance this African agenda? There's an entire new world around artificial intelligence. We now have African governments saying things like, we are going to apply AI, like you're applying balm to an injury, instead of tackling the root of the injury, which in most cases is a trust deficit between the government and its citizens. And so we said, how do we engage on a continental level? How do we advance the challenges that we have? How do we advance the solutions that are currently being, preferred by different practitioners? And so we came up with Safe Space Africa, which is not just a newsletter, but also a quarterly webinar that addresses challenges on the continent. It addresses innovation from the continent, but more importantly, we're starting to put together a set of policy best practices, which hopefully at some point can become a set of recommendations that we can put forward to governments for them to actually do what we want, as opposed to them copying and pasting policies from the EU and from other continents to play about with in Africa. I'll stop here, Claudia, if that's okay. And then if there are any questions, or if we can expand the conversation a bit more, then let's do that. Thank you.
Absolutely. Thank you so much. I think we already have some questions coming in. I'll take my role here as a chair and just start this off with a question that I have myself. This is something that looking at different geographical contexts with our event series here, we started out with looking at the European context, and one thing that came up a lot there was challenges facing public-facing women. So women with public profiles, activists, journalists, those running for public office. I think this is probably a universal thing. We've definitely seen this in the European context and in our discussions there. They often face, I think, especially intense forms of online abuse, and the types of abuse that fall into the category that we're discussing here in the session. How do you see this shaping women's participation in public life? And how do you see the current response, and what can be done to better protect and to better support them?
I think, just like we said, the violence we're seeing against women, the violence we're seeing against women online is the violence we've seen against women offline. In 2018, I was part of a movement called Not Too Young to Run, who campaigned successfully for the voting, for the age for people to stand for office in Nigeria to be reduced. And so what we then had was a lot of young people run for office in 2019. Now, post the 2019 elections, as we all know, the numbers of women in Nigeria's parliament and across Nigeria's political spaces has reduced significantly. As a matter of fact, we have regressed so much. We are now at 1999 numbers for representation of women in politics. It is absolutely abysmal. And so one of the things we did was to bring the women together to ask them questions like, tell us about your experience. And for one woman from the northern part of Nigeria, and anyone who knows Nigeria knows that the northern part of Nigeria is very conservative. It is very religious. It can also be very dangerous for women. She was going to run for office, and she had tweeted something about she's here to serve. And someone took her tweet and turned it around and said something that sounded like she was here to service men, which obviously has a sexual connotation. And so people took this message to her father, and they took it to her community, and they said, this is why we said we don't want women in politics. Your child is online telling men she wants to service them. She ended up stepping down. Several stories like this exist. And so I remember that I I was actually called to come and train the women on how to use social media for elections and how to avoid some of these sticky things that people can manipulate. But the truth is, there's only so much training and so much protecting that you can do. Recently in Nigeria, a legislator, and this is important because it shows how power is not enough protection for women where misogyny is concerned. A senator of the Federal Republic of Nigeria accused the Senate president, who is like number 3 in the country, of sexual harassment. And there's been unleashed, in addition to the several illegalities that have culminated in her being suspended from the Senate, there have been unleashed on her a string of disinformation, misinformation, outright slander and falsehood campaigns just to stop her. They've said things like all her children are from different men, which in Nigeria is a thing. She has blackmailed people into marrying her, this and that and that. The only thing that has not been adjudicated is the complaint that she made about sexual harassment against the Senate president. But everything has been said about her. And these types, you then have young women saying online that if a woman this powerful can be attacked so viciously, what is the hope for younger women? So to directly answer your question, Claudia, the numbers tell the story. The fact that despite pieces of legislation coming into play, the numbers that are online, the number of people who leave social media is absolutely astounding. I remember a year ago, a friend of mine, a young Muslim lady, 2 years ago, she was tweeting about how she doesn't have to take permission from her husband when she goes out. What they do, however, is they have an accountability system so that everybody just knows where everybody is. And Muslims were saying that, some Muslims started saying that she was teaching other women to disrespect their men. And there and then people started saying, anybody who gives me her house address, I will give you X amount of money. We need to beat her and bring her back into the deen. We have seen instances on TikTok from Sudan, from Niger, where women have gone and become content creators, and then their brothers or their husbands or their fathers will beat them, film it, and put it on the same TikTok, in quote, as a warning to other women to not deviate from either their religion or their tradition, etc. What obviously happens after that is that these women leave social media, because there's no way someone beats you up really violently, films it, put it on the same channel you were trying to make a living from, that you don't leave. So there's a slow but painful erasure of the voices of public women. There has been, and I think over the past 18 months, we have seen a rise. I think there's a question in the chat about another question about online misogyny. There's been with the rise of, incel content, red pill content, more women finding their voices and speaking up, more women saying we did not inherit the silence of our mothers. There's now a pushback against feminism and everything closely or even remotely related to feminism. There is a don't let this person deceive you. As a matter of fact, there's almost become a justification for pedophilia and dating people under the age of 18 because they have not been tainted by feminism and those angry, bitter women. So it's a brand new challenge. And one of the things that my friends, and just people in feminist spaces have been discussing is resilience. Because where we thought we would catch a break, you have global leaders making really unguarded statements against women. You have global leaders, and there's a whole thing about how, for instance, we make a joke and we say when America sneezes, the rest of the world catches cancer or catches a cold or gets headache. And so when you have people like, President Trump say certain things about women in their diversities or about diversity, about queer people, etc., you then have African governments saying, oh, by the way, America said. And that almost becomes like a justification for either violence, for either othering, or an exclusion of certain groups of people from conversations, from public services, etc. Nigeria, for instance, has a same-sex marriage prohibition act, which technically criminalizes the existence of queer people. And so we see the effects of that even in our work on online violence, because when violence is committed against a queer person, they don't want to report because somehow it will get out that they're queer. As a matter of fact, we have perpetrators threatening them and saying, if you report me to the police, I will tell the police that you're queer. So that's kind of how it plays out right now.
That is so interesting. I think with the increasing transnationalization of a lot of this, of a lot of these ecosystems, I think we're really seeing a lot of the narratives kind of moving across continents. But I think what is really important to keep in mind with this is just the fact that the legal systems are still very different between, for example, the conversation we had on Europe and the conversation we're having here in the African context. I think the narratives and the threats are very much the same, but what people can actually do about this, I'm sure is a completely different question. Now, you already started answering the question that we have here in the chat on online misogyny. I would just like to get into one of the aspects of this question that I think we didn't discuss too much so far, which is also what can you do to protect boys and young men from being pulled into these movements, from their grievances, their grievances that are definitely rooted in actual grievances that they're experiencing in their daily lives. How can we protect these movements from exploiting their grievances and from pulling them into this sort of toxic spiral of violence and women, hatred of women? Anything that
I think
you've done?
I think thank you for that question. I think it kind of ties into another question around the Nigerian manosphere that's in the chat. So mental health, identity, social skills. One of the things we're trying to do, and please, anyone, if you would like to collaborate on this, just send me a message or something. We want to study the origins of violence. My personal belief, and this is something that my team shares, is that violence doesn't just erupt from nowhere. People experience violence, people see violence, people are tolerating of violence because it is something that is normative, right? And so one of the things we're hoping to do before the end of this year is to study the origins of violence. Where do boys first experience violence? How do they get comfortable with? We've seen, I'll tell you why this became important to us. We saw a lady post on X about her partner buying her. She wanted something to eat. He bought it for her. So she posted it and she was like, my man, which is a fun thing to do. And just, talking about her man. And people started talking about her fingers. And they said her fingers looked like a crocodile's and this and that and that. And people went on and on. And before you knew what was happening, there were thousands of comments in one night. These are people who have never interacted with this lady, who do not know her, nothing, just calling her a crocodile, calling her an alligator, wondering if her skin is abrasive for her man, all sorts of things. And I started thinking, and then somebody tweeted at somebody and said, why are you joining this? And he said, I don't know. I just saw that people, I said I should add to the ratio. And I started thinking, what makes a person so comfortable? You see something happening and all you want to do is join the bandwagon. Is there a certain form of peer pressure that makes a young man think there's something bad going on here? And even though I'm not going to be a bystander, right? I'm not going to be an active bystander. I'm not going to just walk away. The thing I decide I'm going to do is join in on this violence and even lie against this person that I haven't ever met. I probably will never meet. I have nothing to do with it. Just seems cool in that moment to pile on her. And that's where that came from. I was really disturbed by it. And then I started having a conversation with my colleagues, and somehow we came upon this origin of violence. And then I attended a session at the Marmalade Festival in February in Oxford, and Global Fund for Children. They were talking about doing some research where they looked at the algorithm of what young boys were exposed to. And it's violent, it is sexual, it is just inappropriate. And I started thinking again, I wonder what our boys are exposed to when they go online. Is it games? And if it's games, what type of games? Is it sexual content? If it is, what type of sexual content? A friend of mine spoke to me about her son being exposed to pornographic material at his primary school. He's 10. Another boy brought a phone and was showing his peers, pornographic content. And she said one of her biggest challenges and one of her biggest pain points was, number one, obviously her son had never viewed this type of content at home. But number two, she didn't even know what kind of pornographic content he had viewed. Was it a man with a woman, a man with a man? Was it bestiality? She didn't know. And that question has burned in her mind for weeks. Of course, she's now taking it up with the Department of Education, etc. But where do our boys start to see and experience violence from? perhaps we've been dealing too much with the symptoms and not exploring the root causes. Where does misogyny become comfortable? Where does it become a way of life? Yes, we have patriarchy. We have patriarchy that is normalized in our societies. It is normalized in our laws. Nigeria still has a law that says a man can beat his wife. He just can't leave injuries on her body. This is 2025. So we have all these things, but where else are our boys and men tackling, the ones we're tackling to stop online violence? Where are they finding this violent behavior? Where are they becoming one with this violent behavior? I don't have the answers, but this is something that we want to explore before the end of the year. So if anyone has conducted this type of research, please, reach out to us. Let's do something together, and let's try to find some answers that hopefully get us closer to where we're trying to go. I'll quickly answer Lena's question on either now in the future, do we see AI becoming beneficial? Definitely. First of all, it will help us detect and moderate the challenges we face at scale. Right now, there's a team of 2 people who work on our Quran platform, receiving cases, liaising with the lawyers, liaising with the police or anybody else that we need. And we are trying to rejig our system supported by the engine room. But I believe that, with the infusion of AI, which is one of the things that we're doing, we'll be able to, detect some of these challenges at scale. We'll be able to profile them at scale. We will be able to gather and process our information significantly better than we are doing now. The second thing is when we then start to talk about tech platforms, it is language analysis. For instance, if I put out my hand like this, this might not mean anything to you, Claudia, but in Nigeria, if I did this to you, I was insulting your father, and it's a very grievous insult. Right? Very, very, it's the type of insult that it's like, come out and fight. That's literally what it is. So when we have AI models that are, I think one of the speakers from the previous session mentioned that are, seated nicely in San Francisco and determining and, attempting to determine what's hate speech, what's violent, etc. in Africa, they miss out on all of these contexts. They miss out on these nuances. When I tell you waka, you might think I'm referring to Shakira's song, but in Nigeria, that's a very grievous insult. But an AI system that hasn't been trained locally will miss that. And so we hope, and this is one of the things that our Safe Space Africa web series is going to be exploring, how do we capture the essence of who we are? Africa is a massive, massive continent. Nigeria has upwards of 2,000 languages. Right? So you can't have one AI solution from San Francisco responding to the challenges that we have. The other thing is supporting survivors. I know a friend of mine who is studying for a PhD in Canada right now, and one of the things she's trying to do is create a chatbot that documents incidents of gender-based violence in a way that the survivors don't have to relive the experience. And I think that's absolutely beautiful, because even for us, every time we go to the police, they tell us things like, tell us what happened. Sometimes we have the police tell us things like, show us the videos or send us the videos so that we know what we're doing, which is absolutely, absolutely ridiculous. But she's building out a platform because she knows that these are the challenges we have in Nigeria. I want, therefore, for survivors to be able to tell their stories once, and it is documented in such a format. It helps that she's also a lawyer, and a brilliant one at that. Documented in a format that will stand up in court. That means that these ladies or these survivors don't have to keep rehashing their trauma or performing their trauma for the benefit of a judge or a lawyer or whatever it is. The final thing is that AI could do for us, I would say, is data analysis. Right? What is the prevalence in this area? And this is one thing we're doing with Quran. What's the prevalence in this area? What's the prevalence in an area where people are less educated? What's the prevalence in an area where people are more educated, where people are Christian, where they're Muslim, where they're of particular, leanings politically, etc. Yeah, I guess I'll stop there. I think someone's hand was up, but yeah, I'll stop there if there's any more questions.
Thank you so much. These are incredibly important points. Actually, the point on language diversity is something I wanted to pick up on anyway, so maybe we can discuss this in a bit more detail, because I think this is one of the areas where the African context is really very different from, for example, the European context. A lot of the challenges are very similar, but I think with the African context especially, we're just, as you described so well, dealing with so many different languages, all the sort of cultural complexities that, if you have even with a bigger platform, 1 or 2 moderators that are, you know, servicing some of those smaller language groups, they still have to have all that contextual knowledge on the specific euphemisms and culture specific terms that are being used in this space. I think that's an incredible challenge, and we'll be really interested to hear a bit more on sort of how you think this is, you know, being acknowledged at the platform level, at the government level, and any other great ideas for how that could really be kind of integrated into better solutions. But then also I wanted to give Guillaume the opportunity to also jump in. I know he had his hand up earlier, and maybe this is also something he could reflect on as well from his perspective, because I think that's something that is probably relevant for what he presented on as well.
Oh, would you like me to jump in now, Claudia?
Absolutely, if you're
Okay.
happy to.
Kilma, first, this was absolutely fascinating, really listening to you. Thank you so much. I couldn't agree more on every single thing you said, so very happy to have a listen. And I just would like my only the contribution that you were asking. I have worked on it in another setting, some other parts of West Africa, but also in Europe. And one of the things that sometimes isn't, I think, explored enough is what are right now the role models. I remember, you know, asking this question in Tamale, you know, in northern Ghana a couple of months back, and I was asking around to young people of very different, you know, backgrounds and educational levels, etc. Who are your models in terms of then, who do you turn towards on how to approach other human beings, on how to then normalize or not certain behaviors that you describe, you know, this. Just to give you a little statistics, in France, we estimate a minimum of 1 child out of 4 being victim of cyber harassment. 1 child out of 4. Where do we believe that we are going to move forward as a humanity in terms of social justice, in terms of collective progress, when all of these children face this kind of, you know, non-digital and digital traumas? And so, yeah, when I was asking this question to the children that were the perpetrators of, they were like, okay, but this is just right now, again, what is the norm? And if it is the norm, it is because as well, the counter behaviors or the other aren't anymore. And so coming back to the example on the role model issue, you know, the role models in Tamale were pretty much the same one that I was seeing in France. Elon Musk. They were sometime, you know, the again, some MMA, UFC figures. You would have some some sportsmen, a few music, but you didn't have any that would then relate to a positive behavior, respectful and open and empathic to other humankinds. And so I think this question of the incarnation of these principles into either collectives, I think that's more powerful, or individuals that can also be, you know, people that young people can turn towards, is a very important point, and perhaps one that we haven't explored enough. Because then I don't think that the actors of violence and actors that do promote this kind of behaviors that you mentioned a few, but they are so numerous. I don't think that they are going to disappear anytime soon. And so we need as well, I think, the kind of counterbalance, I think, is one of the key aspects that we should perhaps collectively think about.
You're absolutely right. And I think one of the things we fail to account for is that we all have to live in the world, right? So despite the fact that we are kind of existing on these platforms, we are making friends, we are forming new connections, etc. We also have to live in the real world, and we are just as affected by pop culture. For instance, there's a certain song in Nigeria. I'm not going to mention the song because the musician is quite powerful, and I've gotten in trouble with powerful musicians before. I would rather not at this time. But there's a particular song. As a matter of fact, there are many songs, but there's one particular song in my mind that the title of the song, the lyrics of the song, everything speaks to to fraud, everything. The entire lyrics of the song glamorize fraud, glamorize the entire process of fraud with local lingo, etc. It is a hit song in Nigeria. It's a hit song across the continent. It had millions and millions of TikTok challenge dance things. It is a massive, massive song. But the entirety of this song is how do you, it talks about how you, just the process of fraud. And so when you talk about role models, Guillaume, one of the things I think about is, well, this is the thing that they're listening to. We have young people selling scripts for fraud on TikTok, on Reddit, on several platforms, and platforms not taking it as seriously as they should because, it's an African problem. However, the 5 countries that are most targeted by, fraud and scams, etc., originating from Africa or some parts of Africa are the US, the UK, Australia, New Zealand, and Canada. As a matter of fact, in the UK, a couple years ago, maybe 2 years ago, there was a red alert issued because students in secondary schools were being targeted. There have been a number of incidents in the US where teenagers have committed suicide because of sextortion. They have been blackmailed, and when they can't, they just unfortunately end their lives. But what are the platforms doing about this? I remember in 2019, there was so much bigotry and hate speech on Twitter at the time. And I think this was 2019. And I think this was just after Elon Musk had purchased Twitter. And we reached out to them to say, listen, this is what hate speech looks like. You might not understand it, but this is what it looks like. And I remember we emailed him as a group. We emailed their trust and safety team as a group to say, this is what's going on. There's the risk of violence. Nigeria typically has violent elections. Can you do something? This is the type of content you should be looking at. Here are things that you should flag, etc. And they told us to put together a paper and do the work and send it to them. And I thought it's absolutely ridiculous. I don't work for you. You should be thanking me for flagging these issues and then bringing in your really well-paid team to focus on it. And you're telling us that we should do the research and put it together and send a paper, and then your team will review. Don't forget, elections are a live issue, right? And we don't have elections that last 2 years. This is something that we need. And we felt like the credibility of our work and the platforms that we represent, the communities that we represent, would at least warrant a second look at the complaints that we were sharing. But that's literally where it ended. And they just said, oh, you guys should, if you can put together a research paper. And I'm like, a research paper in the middle of elections, when I'm tracking violence online, I have no time to make a research paper for you. And even if I did, this work should be paid. And that's something else to talk about. I think one of us had mentioned Kenya from the previous session, that LLM models have been trained in countries and people have not been paid as they should have been. That's number one. The second challenge is because the LLMs have been trained on the way we speak. When we speak now, they say you are, this could only have been AI, forgetting that a ton of the continent, a huge chunk of the continent was colonized by the English. And so we speak English, very good English. But because you have come to the continent, people have come to the continent, trained AI models on the way we speak is now being flagged as insincere, now being flagged as plagiarized, now being flagged as supported solely by AI. And so that's another challenge we're facing. My thinking is, and this is why, we started Safe Space Africa, there needs to be that cohesive conversation. What is the agenda for Africa? Maybe it starts as regions. Maybe it's West Africa, maybe it's Southern Africa, maybe it's East Africa, maybe it's North Africa. But we need to come together as a collective to say, this is what AI portends for us on the continent. These are the opportunities. And by God, there are so many opportunities, but these are also the risks. Are we going to be deepening the bias that exists? Are we going to be putting into the hands of rogue governments more tools for surveillance and misuse? During NSAS in Nigeria of 2020, and a lot of us heard about NSAS, our government was tracking people using their bank accounts, using all sorts of things. You throw AI into the mix and you realize how dangerous it becomes for activists and advocates and dissenting voices. There's also a suppression of the African feminist movement, which can be exacerbated by AI tools. So these are the conversations that we need to be having, because while AI holds progressive opportunities for the continent, there are risks involved, and we have to take them side by side so that we don't miss out on the good, or we don't become affected by the evil because we've missed out on the good.
Such important points. This is exactly the conversation I hoped we were going to have. I see one of our other speakers has unmuted himself, so I'll give you the opportunity to respond here as well.
Yes, thank you so much, Claudia, for the time. I'm enjoying the conversation, and I had to leave halfway across the time. Today is the National Day in Cameroon, so we have to do festivities. But I think this is so much important that we need to stay here and actually pull the point. I will just start from where Choma ended. In the middle of a crisis, they're asking you to do a research paper, and send for people to think, to sit and then decide upon. We've seen this with COVID. But I'm also happy that it's not only been our experience. And Choma, many people do complain that, how do you speak English? You're from Cameroon, we know they speak French. And that's the question. They always ask me this. I even had a biased jury during my PhD thesis, because they felt like, oh, you've gone to school in French and in English, because you're now speaking English. This is the complexities. But I wanted also to flag something that Choma mentioned, and I'm very happy that she did mention this. She did make reference of it with her friend having kids or boys who are as young as 10. I do a program with in partnership with the US Embassy here called From Boys to Men. And the problem is, most of the times we give women the tools to resist, but we don't give men the tools to actually be tolerant to these women when they are on the other side. And what happens is that you can only resist very much in a society that is this patriarchal. You won't actually stay on it for the rest of your life. That's not only what you have to do. So I'm also advocating that as a he for she ambassador. We call it in the office here he for she, because we also have instances where women have normalized fear. They've normalized things that are happening in and within them, just to think that I don't dare speak about it. People just consider this. They would see me like a weakling, or they would see me like someone who's complaining about nothing. I'm just ranting and stuff like that. Secondly, we've seen this also very much in during political debates around here. We've seen during parliamentary elections, women who've lost their husbands have the graves of their husband decorated at night, just to remind them that they don't have to get into politics. They don't need to go back and mourn their husbands. And it got to a point where we had to set up kind of local vigilante groups to make sure that these women can actually run. And they're serving the communities. Okay, but maybe people say I'm biased by saying this, but they're serving the communities more than men who've been there before them. And this is just proof that most of the times we focus on, I will not say the wrong things, but we give more energy to this. Lastly, there is a movement in Cameroon called Stop Feminicide. It's run by a group of friends whom I know them very well. I think 3 ladies who are running this. And we've been having this conversation. Why are you calling it feminicide? And that is from where Choma started. And this is why the conversation is interesting. When a woman is killed, we tackle a different name. When a man is killed, we tackle a different name. And the 2 scenarios give 2 different kinds of importance to this. If we were tackling it feminicide because we, as policy, discovered that there is more problem as to how women are being treated online, as to how online action has led to them being harmed offline, this would have been different. But we're targeting it feminicide just to actually corner it to the wall and say, hey, look, stay there, it's feminicide. We need to then go after high crime wave in the town, people who are pickpockets in the market and stuff like that. So the problem is also that we are actually giving names to happenings around us so that we can actually belittle or reduce them. I would end here, Claudia.
Thank you so much. And I think also really important to sort of bring that connection in with sort of online, what's happening online, really enabling offline violence. And I think that also brings me to a question that I think came up in the last session, but that we didn't really get time to fully answer. And I think it would be really relevant to bring up here again on sort of online, offline interactions. This was specifically on Kenya, but I think this really applies to all the countries that we've been speaking about. So the question was given Kenya's, but again, looking at other countries, deep digital divide and a disproportionate exposure of marginalized groups, especially rural youth, sexual minorities, and women, to online hate and disinformation. How can we design community-based or offline-first interventions that promote digital literacy or resilience without deepening surveillance or infringing on data rights. I'd be really curious to hear from both of you as sort of a way to wrap this up, going back to not just the online solutions to these problems, but also sort of offline actions that we can all take to respond.
I think when we first started our digital literacy project, we had big dreams. This is 2017 or so. We had big dreams. We wanted to go into schools. We wanted to show them things like CGI, how cartoons were made. We wanted to spark their curiosity, etc. And then we went to our first school. Well, you have to be accredited by the government to be able to go into local education authority schools, which is where we wanted to go. So they gave us a list of 10 schools, and one of the schools we went to, the kids were on the floor. They were sat on the floor. The school was also not connected to the electricity grid at all. So it wasn't that there was a power outage. It was that there was not going to be any power in the school because, there was nothing connected. It was also a very rural area. So our dreams to, ferry over, to carry a projector, screens, all those types of things weren't going to work. That's actually where our card games started from, because this game is called What in Nigeria, WHOT, and everybody plays it. They play it at bars, they play it in community centers, you play it in a number of ways. And so we thought we were going to make What cards and then put tech knowledge on them. So there are like 5 categories: digital citizenship, tech heroes, and all sorts of things, tech careers, etc. So we put this information on the cards, we took it to the schools, and we would ask them to play and ask us questions as they played. And that was our introduction, our digital literacy introduction to the children. We then found out that whenever we left, they would go to their teachers to ask them more questions, but the teachers didn't have any digital literacy knowledge either. So that's now, created for us a need to go back to the schools to train the teachers so that there's some second level, support for the kids as they continue to learn, as they continue to change their careers from I want to be a doctor or a nurse. You now have people saying I want to be a developer. And we hope that, we continue to spark that desire in them to try different things, to explore different things. I think that I've always believed that, from studying social media for masters, one of the things we were taught was social media is people on the left, people on the right, and whatever technology applies to those people in the middle. For our kids in some of these schools, it's cards. Right? For some other people, it is our mentorship program where we train people over a 6-month period. For some other people, it's a WhatsApp group. For some other people, it's completely different things depending on the circumstance. And I think that the one-size-fits-all technology solution will continue to fail because it doesn't take into cognizance our experiences, our challenges, our hopes, our dreams, but also our specific contexts. And that's my approach to it. We have to meet people where they are. There's a reason why a thing such as human-centered design exists, right? You have to meet people where they are. We found out that we trained women to build websites. 1 year after, none of them were doing anything with the websites because we wanted to say we had trained women how to build websites. And so now we ask them, what do you want tech to do for you? Some people say, I want to sell more items. So we teach them digital marketing and content creation. Some people say, I want to do this. So we help them with their branding. Some people say they want to do so many different things. We have found that the application of technology to things that especially women are already doing produces greater results than the blanket come and code or the blanket come and build a website. And that's kind of our approach to it.
Thank you so much. I think that it's just good to end on a positive note on sort of proactive things that can and already be done, already being done to provide solutions. I see, Ngala, you've unmuted yourself. If I could just ask for a very brief intervention because we are really nearing the end of our 2 hours.
Yes, I just wanted to say, when we walk on our streets and we have an accident, what happens is we have first responders that come there. But when there is actually violence in communities and stuff, who comes there? People with smartphones and the rest. How do you then responders, as we would call them, peace weavers, or we would call them community weavers, to actually change this? So actions that should be taking place online should also replicate themselves offline, while taking into consideration the fact that offline actions take maybe longer or different kind of dynamics or nexus to actually intervene. I can share resources that we've actually designed in this kind of area later. So thank you.
Thank you so much to all three of our panelists, and especially now for the second session to Chioma. This was really insightful and incredibly valuable discussions. Thank you so much for your time, and seeing that we're now at the end of the hour, I'll hand it over to my colleague Christopher to close this up for today. But thank you so much.
Thank you, Claudia. Thank you, Chioma. That was really interesting. And I don't want to keep you too long, and I definitely won't attempt to try and provide a summary of everything that's been discussed over the last couple of hours, but just a few sort of themes which I think came to mind as we were going through. The first one, which we came up on several occasions, is the extent to which technology is itself neutral, or as some people framed it, nothing more than an instrument or tool or extension of the physical world. And I think, maybe it would be interesting if we had more time to explore where there are sort of limits to technology's innocence and sort of the reality of the human threat and how those two sort of online and offline spaces intersect, that obviously came up repeatedly. A second theme is sort of this idea of trust and how that is related to social contracts between states and the public, and I think in particular the question asked around, which is very relevant in Kenya right now and in Nairobi in particular, how we avoid sort of surveillance and in doing so try to strengthen social contracts with our solutions rather than weaken them. And then finally, this sort of thinking in relation to what Chioma was saying, the international versus regional versus local policy solutions all needing to work together, and the importance of very specific local realities at the same time as broad solutions. So just to conclude, RUSI Nairobi has done a huge amount of work over the last 10 years in the PCV space, and all the work we're doing now in the physical world is this PCVs. It has been historically in PCV. And the terrorism and conflict team that we sit within has focused extensively on violent extremism as well, but in particular looking at what works and what doesn't, and increasingly also focusing on the far right. But I think what's struck me from listening to this 2 hours is the need to look at the intersections between different forms of extremism and different forms of conflict, and in the physical space, we're increasingly adopting sort of a systems approach, or what we're calling sort of integrated programming approach, and that system also overlaps with the online space, and sort of failing to recognize how the online space affects the systems that we're working within in our peace building programming and our PCV programming is particularly dangerous. And obviously that understanding those relationships between online and offline spaces is relevant both to understanding the threat, but also to the solutions. So yeah, really fascinated to listen to you and to our guest speakers. So thank you so much. I want to present a reminder of our upcoming conference report, and hopefully there'll be further outputs from these webinars and in-person conferences. So please do keep an eye out for information regarding our next event in Brussels on Latin America. But thank you so much, and have a lovely afternoon or evening wherever you are. I'll end the event there. Thank you.